Hey everybody, welcome back from your unauthorized break. Nyadlala. I know you needed time to stretch your legs and breathe. We took in a lot this afternoon. We appreciate you coming back. I also understand some people have public transport, there's issues, people need to get home, people need to get to family, it's understandable. We appreciate you who remain with us because our final topic for today, day one, is absolutely essential. Our discussion is reimagining the South African Museum beyond the 200-year-old Wunderkammer, which I think is fantastic. The Iziko South African Museum, ISAM is the acronym, is the oldest and largest museum in Southern Africa. Established in 1852, the museum has a history of scientific endeavor and scholarship in the disciplines of natural history and humanities that's unparalleled in our region. It also has a problematic colonial history, steeped in unethical collections, research, and exhibition practices. In 2025, just next year, the Iziko South African Museum will be 200 years old. And ISAM is leveraging this bicentenary to reimagine its exhibitions and implement decolonized and inclusive storytelling that promotes co-curation, transformation, social cohesion, nation building, activism, and awareness. A key related task is researching the museum's vast collections and archives with fresh eyes, multidisciplinary perspectives, and new technologies to unlock reimagined Africa-relevant narratives for dissemination to the public. I must personally thank you because a couple of years ago, I wrote a play called Venus versus Modernity, the story of Sarki Bartman, a process that began a decade ago. And the shift in my understanding, my true conscientization around South African slavery was because of my experience at Iziko. So I thank you. I thank you. I mean, you can read in a textbook that South Africa had slavery for 270 years. You won't understand chattel slavery, what it means for us in this city, in this province, in this country, the complexity of what that history, the ripple effect of that history on all of us in this country, without the immersive, creative, careful, considered, sensitive experience that was afforded to me by being a participant at the Iziko Museum. So thank you for what you do. And I think it's something everybody needs to experience. And we're lucky because we're going to go there tonight. Tonight we're being hosted for a performance which is centered around Nongawuse. Hey, I'll describe that a little bit later. But first and foremost, I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Wayne Florence, Director of Research and Exhibitions at the Iziko Museum of South Africa. And he is joined by Dr. Wendy Black, Dr. Wandile Kasibe, Annelies Kotza, and Dr. Nokuthula Nhleko. And I'll hand over to Dr. Wayne to introduce everybody and contextualize everybody. We are running slightly over, so we might have to cut back a little bit on time, but I am aware that you have refashioned the discussion a bit. The floor is yours. Thank you so much. Can we give them a round of applause, please?
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me in the cheap seats at the top there? Thank you very much, Lebo. I really appreciate you doing my introduction for me. And so we saved a bit of time there. I'm going to run through very quickly who our panel is and what the purpose is of what we are here for. And very briefly, because we're trying to make up time now, my name is Wayne. I'm a natural scientist. I also work for Iziko as the Director of Research and Exhibition. I feel like I'm at an AA meeting here or something, introducing myself. But to my left, we have Dr. Wendy Black. She's the current Chief Curator of Art and Social History. Dr. Wandile Kasibe, who for many, many years was our public programs manager, coordinator, but has recently, and I'm very happy to announce this, has very recently been appointed as our Curator of Culture and Identity. So, then Ms. Annelies Kotze, who also works in the space of culture and identity, but is appointed as the curator of social history, specifically to manage or to curate the Wunderkammer Museum also. But she gets involved in a lot of things. And then Dr. Nhleko is the curator of entomology. She actually works on ants. And Noktula's been with us. Actually, she's the longest serving member of our staff here. When did you join the museum?
2006.
2006. So Noktula works on ants and is a natural scientist. That word natural scientist is also, I feel like, is quite a difficult title to have in this space. So just very quickly, if we can get the slideshow up. No? Okay. So we're reimagining the South African Museum. It's a project that's a long term in the making. We've done extensive consultations. We've listened to our public. And in terms of this particular museum, which has a history, a colonial history of being a natural history / anthropology, archaeology museum, we have collectively taken the process forward of reimagining the museum with lots of enthusiasm. If you don't know, the South African Museum is part of 12 museums that make up Iziko Museums of South Africa. I'm going to go through these very quickly because we're trying to save time now. And the ISAM in 2025, and we weren't formed in 1852, sorry, Lebo, but it was actually 1825. So if your maths is correct, then in 2025 we will be 200 years old. And there are many changing faces of ISAM, even not only in terms of the structural infrastructure, but also, our staffing, our practices, our exhibitions. And in fact, the last development that we had of the South African Museum, we've just finished now. And essentially what it will do is when people come to the museum, they don't have good exposure to the almost 10 million specimens and objects and artifacts and fossils that we have in the back of the museum. And so with the courtyard project that we've just completed, we are going to be giving the public towards 2025 and using that as leverage. We are going to be allowing the public to be behind the scenes without actually being behind the scenes. Yeah? And so we created these big shopfront windows that look into our very expensive, cutting-edge laboratories and storerooms, etc. It really is a fantastic asset for Africa. It really is a fantastic asset for South Africa in terms of its cutting-edge, in terms of these cutting-edge developments. And hopefully this evening when you come to the museum, you'll be able to see a bit of it. Now, our exhibitions were always stylized. This is typically what our galleries look like. They're very taxonomic in nature. But we also have a problematic history in terms of unethical exhibitions, in terms of unethical practices. Some of you will know about the famous Bushman diorama, etc. But as a collective, we are working tirelessly to move away from those unethical practices and make reparations for them. I also think that our exhibitions suffer from something called the fish in the orange case syndrome. This is a fish. It's in an orange case. There's nothing special about the design there. And I know you had a design workshop earlier, but that design is just fantastic. But you'll see at the top of the fish is a label, and what it tells you is that this is a fish. Okay, so that type of model we want to move away from, a type of taxonomic model. And so we, throughout all our consultations, we came up with these principles for reimagining. And they include decolonizing our museums, being consultative, inclusive, to ensure that there's representativity, and that we raise awareness, and that we promote activism. That's an interesting one in museums, because some people don't believe we should be activists. But we'll discuss that later when we get to the panel. And this is in the interest of social cohesion and nation building for us. The ISAM should not be underestimated in terms of its nation building potential or nation building contribution. We have 10 million specimens. Each one of those specimens is a dot on a map. Each one of those specimens is a dot on a map through space and time, and they provide us significant information to be able to make decisions at a very high level that contribute to things like the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. So the potential of the ISAM for nation building is significant. Some of our reimagined exhibitions I'm just going to run through quickly is the Tata Madiba exhibition. This is the wonderful thing about working in Iziko, I think, is that we have multiple disciplines. We cover art, social history, natural history. And we are able to then translate that into exhibitions that transcend those disciplines. For instance, in the Tata Madiba exhibition, we have art in terms of an art installation there, but that also is used, the art installation on the left there, it is also used for conversation starting. We even have, many of you might not know that Tata Madiba was instrumental in some biodiversity legislation in terms of conservation. So we even have from our collections, our scientists have named specimens, new species for Mandela. And coupled with that, we have virtual exhibitions. Our latest exhibition, Humanity, takes the story of human origins or human evolution and deconstructs it from the white male scientist narrative, and actually starts with why we're so different. But Wendy will tell you a bit more about that when we get to discussion. Hidden Wonders of the South African Museum is an exhibition that looks beyond the aesthetics of the object itself and delves into the metadata. It delves into the information that's locked within the specimens themselves and highlights those specimens that have significant societal benefit for us. Specimens that we are using to mitigate climate change. In fact, Noktula works on some of these ants. She works on arid ants, and her research is feeding directly into decision-making about climate mitigation. Other exhibitions that we have coming up include living symbols. Here we're taking wonderful, fantastic animal casts or animal mounts that we have, but recontextualizing them using, reinterpreting them and recontextualizing them using indigenous knowledge and using rock art as a base for that. And then last but not least, the Sea and Us, which somebody spoke about, pre-colonial narratives. This is an exhibition about us and the exploitation of the seas and how we have this dependence on the oceans, but it actually starts with telling the story of pre-colonial utilization of these marine living resources in terms of how indigenous people were developing technologies, methodologies, etc., and then using the ocean seasonally for subsistence, and how that translates into modern day subsistence fishing, artisanal fishing, and those types of things. But that's enough from me. So let's get to the chat and let's get the conversation going. I'm going to just structure these a little bit in that we've got two small sessions, and I need to put my specs on because age is caught up with me. The first session, or little 15-minute session, is themed around, as we approach the 200 years of ISAM, what should the ISAM not be anymore? And so I'll ask you individual questions, if that's okay. Wendy, we'll start with you. We often speak of reimagining and decolonizing the museum. When it comes to the exhibitions in ISAM, what actually needs to change in the context of ISAM?
So ISAM, as you have said, has always been viewed as a natural history space. And as has been spoken about briefly in the previous session, is that we need to have engaged, community-driven spaces. So for ISAM, we need to unlock those engagement spaces, and we need to get rid of almost the stigma that's associated with what is essentially viewed as a colonial building, a colonial space, a space where people have been excluded in the past. So it's always been about dinosaurs and animals. And in that space, we've included static culture, like the history of the Khoisan, for example. So that needs to be removed. And we need to start engaging with our community, with various publics, about how we change our exhibitions, how we tell those stories, how they become more inclusive, how they become more welcoming to South Africans, who a lot of the time don't visit our museum because of the stigma associated to it, but also to the tourism industry, to our visitors. So we don't just have 3,000 school kids coming through because they have to and their teachers force them. We actually have parents and kids wanting to engage with the content, wanting to see heritage, wanting to experience their past, like with humanity, for example, and really starting to understand the deep heritage that South Africa offers.
Okay. And Wandile, I see you writing me furiously, but Wandile should, the ISAM itself and any other museum, I suppose, should these museums be a reflection of our heritage, or should they actually give us a microphone or a megaphone, towards activism also?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for that, Wayne. I think maybe we need to, answer that question from the premise, perhaps maybe, draw from Elaine's question, to ask perhaps maybe the question of questions, which is, how do we decolonize and transform, these museums into becoming sites or rather safe spaces for unsafe ideas? Now, this is now very, very important. How do you transform a site with a specific colonial baggage into becoming a safe space, but for unsafe ideas? And I think that museums, with their own museumness and the history of how they are produced, society must begin to ask, I think, even far deeper questions, to ask whether museums can escape the politics out of which they were born. Now, this is not, referring to other forms of museums, because my own interest is in the modern museum, your natural history museum, and of course, ethnographic museums. And I think that there needs to be some kind of an effort for these museums also not to stand aloof from society, because if they stand aloof from society, they are not part and parcel of the identity of a people. They define themselves outside of people's persuasions and people's cultural expressions. Then you would have a museum that is not really it does not address the concerns of a people or a community in which it is based or in which it is located. So I am of the view that museums should become those sites through which a people's expression is actually found, and they should become, I argue, institutions or sites of cultural engagement where lively discussions take place. If a country or a society has certain, socio-political or social-cultural issues, they must know that there is a place called a museum, almost act like a beacon of hope where they go and debate the issues that they are confronted with. And I think in that way, then we are able to bridge the gap that has been created either through colonialism or apartheid in South Africa, because we know that the physicality of museums, they are located in the city where a lot of people can't access those sites, and also how to bridge that issue, that gap that has been created through maximizing access and so forth. So I do agree that to a large extent, museums should become an expression of a society in which it is based. But in this concept, of course, in this instance, when I say society, it's another, there's a debate around, what defines society. Yeah, but I think in the context of our nation and the state, and people should find expression through museums, and that expression should be, I think, produced through interaction with communities.
Thank you. So that's very interesting, Annelies, because you've done a lot of work in community engagement. And so how do you actually make sure that you, as an individual curator or scientist, approaching those communities, that you accurately reflect the community's opinions, the community's feelings, the community's emotions about the particular community themselves when you are developing an exhibition. And just a follow-up question also onto that, I'm sorry to do that, but a follow-up question also onto that is, you know, what are the characteristics of someone that has to go out and do that type of work? We often hear that if, you know, some people saying, if you don't have that lived experience, you cannot do that work. So just from your experiences working with those communities.
You know, when your question is also very loaded because we can't assume that they have singular feelings and emotions and stuff because a community, it's a community, but it's also comprises of different people with different experiences, different needs. So, you know, one thing that you can't assume when you're going out to speak to a community is that, one, you mustn't think that you come with all the answers because we don't know everything. And that is the experience that I've had. Because you come there with your Iziko t-shirt on and you studied archaeology and they're like, oh, so now you come here to take again from us.
Yeah.
You know, and the one thing that I don't do is I don't justify. The Museum of the Past was wrong. You know, what we did was wrong. And I speak specifically about South African Museum because that is where the worst things happen, and that is where the representation of specific communities was badly done. So when I do go speak to the communities that are affected by the way the exhibitions were done in South African Museum specifically, you have to be very sensitive to what they say. You don't justify. You don't yes, but. You know, you let them speak. You let them tell you what they want, how they feel. And, you know, it's very difficult because, as academics, I want to say, you know, you have to go like kind of by the book. But when it comes to going out into a community, yeah, that book is gone. You can make a fire with that book. You can make a small one and feed like a little, have a meal. But it's just that you need to be sensitive. You need to listen. That is the most important thing. And not think that we know everything.
So, I mean, working in Iziko and working in the South African Museum, we've often been criticized over the years for not being progressive. Not progressive. Progressive is not the right word. For not engaging the communities and speaking for them. I've once had a conversation with Wandile about this. You might not remember it. And it was about the ethnographic wall, where we had the Bushman diorama in that wall and we removed it, etc. And Wandile said to me, "This is the crime scene." Yeah, and the conversation went on, and he was saying we should be doing this, and at during that conversation, I said to him, "Hold on a second, but we actually need to ask these communities," and so that is a big driver for us. But given the criticisms that we've had, Nokatula, as a natural scientist, having served in the South African Museum, served is a very bad word also, but having worked in the South African Museum for over almost 2 decades, does the South African Museum get a bad rap? Is it, you know, the work that we do is so critically important towards ensuring the societal benefit of many in South Africa, not only South Africa, but regionally and globally? Are we getting a bad rap?
I think so, Wayne. The reason I'm saying that is because, okay, as a scientist, the information that we are giving the public, is the way we interpret it, is it accessible to everyone? For example, the language that is used in our spaces, in our collections, in our exhibitions, is mainly targeting like a specific audience. So if we say the museums are for everyone, are we really accommodating everyone? And the information, all the research that we're doing, is it for everyone? Are we really educating everyone? If I can take my grandmother, I'm from the Eastern Cape, by the way. If I can take my grandmother from the village to our collections and then show her this end, okay, Makulu, this is Okimamex something something. They won't relate to that. It's like, what is this now? What is this word? Where is it coming from? And all that stuff, and take them to the exhibitions. Of course, they will relate to the displays, but the information that is there, is it really talking to them? I don't think so. So as the museum, we need to work harder to be inclusive, to accommodate everyone. And I'm very happy because as a researcher and as a taxonomist, so I'm at a space whereby I can identify species, describe species, and give them the new names using my mother language. So that someone, so that a little girl from the village can see that the research is not only for certain people. I was telling you a story earlier on that I was giving a talk to high school learners, and this one girl said to me, Noktula, what did your mother say when you told them that you are going to university to study insects, to study ants? I completely understand where she's coming from, because when I grew up, we're like, science is only for certain people. So we need to make everyone understand that it's not only for certain people, but it's for everyone.
Wonderful. While we're with you, let us just move into our little next session quickly. I'm very mindful of time. Also, we've lost a bit of time, but this next section deals with, how have we or must we reimagine? And I'd like you to cite some examples, current examples of things that you're doing currently in terms of reimagining. Noktula, you spoke a lot about, and a lot of scientists are actually doing this now. A lot of South African scientists are using indigenous languages to name species, but it also speaks to collection development strategies. Answering questions that are relevant to Africa, answering questions that are relevant to our society. The questions that we asked 150 years ago when we were collecting is very different to the questions we're asking today. And so, in your experience, how are you adapting your research? Because before it used to be very taxonomic, right?
Yeah.
This is an ant, you want to know how many ants there are, you're naming them all, etc. But your science is actually done for a different purpose today. Can you just talk us through a bit of the societal benefit of what you're doing and how you do it?
Yes. Oh, yes, I'm studying insects, ants in particular. So why are we studying insects? I know I always get all these questions, like why ants and why not ants? I mean, they are cool, but that's not the reason.
They are very photogenic too, ants, by the way.
Definitely. But it's not that is not the only reason. They are telling a very interesting story. Before I joined Iziko, I didn't know that. I mean, I saw ants like, oh, this one is like similar to that one and that. I didn't know that like hundreds and hundreds of species that are there. But what do we do with this information? Insects, they play a huge role in our ecosystem. And we use this research, like these insects, to understand climate change and the impact of climate change to other organisms as well. And also, I'm sure we all love honey. So we know without insects, without bees, we won't have honey. So yeah, they are good for food security. Yeah.
And toast.
So think about all those. Think about all those bees next time you have a flat white with honey. Annelies, just a similar question. Just take us through the consultation. Give us examples of the consultations that you've done. In terms of, telling new narratives in our museums, in the South African Museum or one of our other museums, and that tells inclusive stories. Just give us some examples of some of the communities you've worked with, and how we're actually translating that into exhibitions.
I think the biggest situation for me was giving communities access to collections. I say access in a very inverted commas situation because it was never ours to have. So it is their objects. We know how objects came into our collections. So opening up our doors and our cupboards and our drawers and having people actually see what we have because we see the objects, we do the research, we do exhibitions. But it's people's stories, it's people's histories, it's people's objects. So opening up our collections, I think, is a very important thing. And one thing I also want to talk about when we talk about access is, like you said, I work at Book Cup, and Wendy and I were talking about now, why would a hungry child want to come to a museum? How do you get someone to come into a museum if it's a big white building? I mean, that building is intimidating. I wouldn't want to come in there. I'm just saying. So getting people to actually come there, like going to different communities, talking about what we have, showing them the objects, inviting them to our spaces. Like even at Book Up, I asked Car God once if he wants to come inside and just come see what we have.
Yeah.
And he was telling me then stories about his experience in Book Up. So it's those non-conventional things that we need to do in order to hear what our communities want.
Yeah, I suppose it's not only just access, though. It's also related to, co-curating with communities about particular objects that belong
Absolutely.
to them, and gaining that insights. Wandile, about these local communities, how do we involve these local communities in developing content for museum collections, and sorry, I'm actually asking you the wrong question. Won't you unpack for us, apologies, won't you, it's very far, won't you unpack for us how we ensure inclusivity in exhibitions and programs, because you've got that public programs experience to reflect, diverse voices of South Africa. And what are the priorities for exhibition content to promote, activism within the spaces? The type of activism that South Africa actually needs.
Yeah, no, it is very, very important. And I don't think that I will do justice to that question because of time. I mean, I've written about this and I speak on this, but I won't really give an extensive response to it. I think that one of the ways in which the museum is currently doing that, I think through the mobile museum, one has an opportunity to take the museum to where people are, that they are, it's a very, very great initiative. There's no doubt about it. And we've worked through that, project to almost, close the gap that has been created through, political processes in South Africa. Those who studied the history of this country, that people were forcefully removed from, the CBD. It means that people now would have to travel to get to the museum. The question is now, if then, within understanding that history, how does then a museum, how do we get to where people are? And I think that's where the mobile museum project came into existence, because now it answers that question. But there are other ways now that one, through which one can explore issues of access. There's intellectual access. How do we make sure that people are part and parcel of how knowledge production is administered in museums? And how do we make sure that there's multiplicity of voices that are part and parcel of that ongoing process of how knowledge is produced? Because if, for example, we apply the approach of of a single voice, which is basically what the museum has been, the curatorial processes have for the longest time, since the birth of the museum, have been built on the idea that the curator then becomes the knower. They become the originator of knowledge. And the people who are on the other side, they are almost like, children, they don't know. And I think that in the post-colonial era, and with the questions that have been posed, and I think that the museum then becomes almost an experience. Part and parcel of that project is to almost create an experience wherein a people also become, knowers, because they actually teach the teacher something in the process. So knowledge is not unidirectional, it becomes bidirectional, because it comes, both ways. And the curator, on the other side, almost becomes, the person who listens and work through, the views and aspirations of those communities. Because if we are unable to do that, it means that we are reproducing the very same colonial violence, where people or visitors are treated as people who do not know, when those visitors, in fact, those very cultural exhibitions or objects are basically about those communities. This means that they are actually the experts themselves. So I think for me, we need to reach to that point, and through that process, then we're able to almost imagine what I would term as museomorphosis. So whoever is going to use this must reference me here. Museomorphosis then becomes a process where a museum actually, it gets taken through a process of full transformation where it becomes almost part and parcel of a people in which it is located. It almost becomes a transformed institution. And I think that one cannot achieve that outside of the context of working through communities. And activism is an important part, and it must be acknowledged in the work that we do, because we're dealing here with a very important process. We're dealing with the trouble. We're dealing with a colonial baggage which actually has its own inherent troubles and problems. And how do we begin to apply activisms? And I mean activism. I want to suggest that perhaps in the work that we do in the post-colonial era, we need scholar/activists, people who are going to, almost push the boundaries in order to effect the changes that are needed in society. Otherwise, we'll recycle the same kind of problems that we're trying to move away from.
Okay. I'm so glad we have problem solvers and people that are thinking in that way, because that's what we need. I'm very mindful again of the time. I'm going to claim 5 extra minutes, actually, so that we can have some two-way engagement here. But Wendy, just the last word here in terms of, just tell us about the Humanity exhibition. This is an exhibition that, I don't want to maybe use the word decolonizes the narrative of human origins, etc. And through the process, I mean, it was a long project. It was a 6-year project or something like that. Took lots of resources, funding, etc. But ultimately, we ended up with a learning experience for ourselves also. We engaged communities. Tell us a bit about that process, but don't leave out the bits about design. Because I think in the absence of our chief curator of design and exhibitions, just tell us a bit about how we the methodologies we used with that exhibition.
All right. So humanity was an idea that formed, my early years of tenure as curator of archaeology at Iziko, where more and more teachers and students were coming to the museum asking for help in teaching human evolution, because it's frowned upon, people don't understand it, and it's not an accepted concept globally, let's be honest. So we wanted to broach the topic, but somehow make it inclusive, where people would understand human evolution and begin to perhaps accept it. And the only way to do that was to get the opinion of origin stories from across South Africa. And that's what we did. We started with a small team from Iziko and from the University of Cape Town, with the Human Evolution Research Institute, and started traveling the country and speaking to people, asking them how they would like human evolution stories told and what their origin stories are, so that we could make connections across the board and share that as a national institution. And it was very successful. It was incredibly enlightening. We spoke to hundreds of people, probably, over the course of many years, with a break of COVID right in the middle. And what came out was the idea of interconnectedness of people through space, time, place, and heritage. And this intertwined vision that people had of evolution. And it was wonderful to see, and we also spoke to them about how they would like to see evolution told. How would they like to see the objects shared? How would they like to see fossils shared? We've got this race-based scientific research as the foundation of archaeology and paleoanthropology in this country and elsewhere. And those nuanced ideas, that infiltration of racism within archaeology and the paleoanthropology space came across strongly. And we as museum professionals and academics had to sit and listen while people unpacked their distrust, their disappointment, often their hatred of museums and science, especially the science that we're trying to bring to a community. And we accepted that. We aired our dirty laundry, we took responsibility, we spoke about changing that narrative. And how this came about was predominantly through design. So this interconnectedness, the weaving between people, places, and things came across in a way in the exhibition where instead of having white, Western-type walls of everything behind glass, we built a weaved basket, which is very Afrocentric. It spoke to people on almost a visceral level. You walk into the space and you can smell the reeds. They are Mkansi reeds from KZN. They were harvested from a local farm run by women, and all these people were involved in the creation of the space. We also were told by multiple communities that the object that you are displaying should be held in the earth from where it was taken. So we traveled and we went and we collected soil as much as we could from the places where archaeological objects were taken, and we've put that in the exhibition. And we don't talk about that in the exhibition, it's just there, so that people feel that this is a part of their ancestry. We also took DNA from 100 people, asked them about their personal family history, gave them the results, so it wasn't extractive in nature as we've seen in science before. They got their results, it was their choice to share it with us, and then we told some of their stories in the exhibition. And that was really bringing them into the story of human evolution, to show that yes, we're 99.9% the same, but the differences that we see, you can visualize here. And a lot of that comes down to things like skin color, which was a nice segue of us to tackle difficult histories and stories like racism and have it up front and place the museum in its place in telling that racism story and where it comes from. So we don't hide from it, and that's part of what museums should be doing, what Wandile is saying, about really tackling difficult histories and making them safe spaces to talk about these things. But bringing that modern idea of human evolution and how you all fit in that exhibition, and then take you back in time and show you how evolution works. And it's really been successful, it's worked. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I feel almost like the questions that we had earlier on were questions that were meant for us. Yeah. And so what I want to do now is, I see they've given us an extra 6 or 8 minutes or so. I want to open it up to all of you. What we'd like is, Dr. Kasibi said he would like questions, actually. We know there's a space for statements, but we would actually like some questions so that we engage with each other, because we're also doing lazy research here, and you are our private advisory panel, or our international advisory panel, rather. Colleagues, and I also asked that we'd like to get in as many questions as possible, so if you can be concise.
I think I have 2 questions. I wanted to start with this one, firstly. I mean, it's an article in Cape Times, 2013, by Dr. Wunderkammer. I mean, he pleads here that, I quote, "I call for establishment of the Museum Truth and Repatriation and Restitution Commission for the task of correcting the wrongs of the past cannot be left to the museum alone, because of the institution will be tainted by the past. With tainted past have no moral authority to be correct of the correctors," close quote. I mean, the interest of me in quoting this is that when will be Iziko establish, that TRT of truth and truth, TRC, let me just say TRC, when will Iziko establish that? Because it's important for Iziko on its own establish it in order for those who are within the community of Iziko address the injustice of the past. We know for the fact that all the museum has, Dr. Wadile stated in the article, remain a crime scene. When will we address those injustices that occurred? Secondly, I still remember as well when I was still in primary school, there was those mobile museum that used to come. I no longer see it. So my interest now is that why maybe with the Department of Education, because I see that now there's issues between Iziko and the teachers. Why not then with the Department of Education tighten up the relationship between the two? Because this is a very much component of part of curriculum, especially in geography and history as well, so that it plays the role of the community engagement, because those students are part of the community as well. So when you teach them, which means they will go back in their community and teach their own peers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Kasibi, you want to take that one?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, the question, thank you very much for that question, Songezo. I think really the question that that we are referring to is where I asked, are museums the correct correctors? I go on to make an argument that if museums still hold on to tainted material, quote-unquote material, such as sacred human remains of our ancestors, do they have the moral authority or the locus standi to make any comment on the very same things that they refuse to repatriate back to those communities? And then I argue that in the presence of that debate, in fact, I was referring to the museological institution in general, across the board, to say if museums still hold on to material or hold on to material that is meant to be repatriated back to communities, the museums perhaps they do not have the moral authority up until they arrive at a conclusion where they are able to return that which was stolen or taken through a very specific colonial context and violence, such as your human remains and human tissues that were collected at sites of genocide and during the wars in the battlefields. And the second, then I argue that perhaps what we need to do is to establish what I call the museum TRRC, where the institutions, these museums then are made to actually confront the very same, colonial past that they may actually be running away from addressing. And for me, this is very important because it allows for society to begin to know what is it that is hidden in museums, especially natural history museums and ethnographic museums. And furthermore, I argue that perhaps we need to de-ethnographize museums, because through those ethnographic displays, that is where you find issues of dehumanization of those who were earmarked as lesser human beings, located in the lacuna between modern human beings and the animal world. That is why natural history museums, it was easy to find African people being displayed next to animals, because it passed on a certain message that we were located outside of the human rank. We're actually allocated in a space that is lesser so that the kind of violence could be justified through certain legislations. And I think for me, those are bigger questions that we must ask. And I must appreciate, I think, the progressive approach that was taken by Iziko in that it took down those ethnographic, the Bushman diorama to address that question. How do we restore the dignity of people who were dehumanized through a process of curatorial, installation of certain exhibitions that earmarked, African people, Khoisan communities in particular. And I think for me, those are bigger questions that we must begin to. I see your time. And there's no time to address. These are big questions, but absolutely. I think you're correct, Songezo, in saying that you're posing that question back to the institution. When will that museum truth restitution and the repatriations commission, when will that be established by the institution? And I think that is a fair question, because if the institution still has those tended material, how do we begin to address those things? And I want to believe that processes of restitutions have taken place, but one then needs to understand that there are processes that are currently, I think, unfolding and underway. And those processes, perhaps somebody would need to know, what's happening at the moment. So there are certain objects, sensitive objects that have been returned back to communities. But what about other institutions? I think that question is fair in saying that when will we be able to even reassess the epistemological basis upon which methods of research have been established within museums? Because to a large extent, these colonial museums are still using certain methods that are linked to colonial continuities. How do we begin to decolonize and reassess those methods? And I think for me, that's a very important question, which links to the linguistic question, labels that are written, whose language is being used there? How do people access the language that is being used to almost, describe certain objects?
I think, colleagues, in the interest of time also, and I know there was a second, thanks. I know there was a second question around education and working with the education department. You're 100% correct. We are working with the education department. We make accessible the mobile museum. We do outreach. We have hundreds of thousands of kids that come through our doors every year who we bus in from communities, etc. So we can speak a little bit more on that, perhaps outside of here and this evening. I don't know if we have time for just one more question, or if we end it here. We got one question at the top there. Sorry, guys. We're going to have to. What we're going to do is this, I think. We'll take one more question for the panel, and then this evening, if you're coming to the opening ceremony, we will also be on hand to chat with people in some of the exhibitions we've showed you. And then we can engage with you. And also keep in mind that tomorrow's a session about restitution and all sorts of things. So the conversation will continue. Yeah?
Hi. Hi, there we go. Yeah, I'm Kirsten Poking from Work Hub, and I hear what you're saying about really engaging with the community, and I just wanted to ask, would you be open to having just basically people come in with suggestions on how to engage and actually just trying them out? Like, let's just try things. That was what the thinking session, the design thinking session was about this morning. Not being afraid to fail, or getting it right the first time. Let's just try something new and different. Also maybe adding a little gazebo somewhere so that we can actually chill on the stoop, engage in our stoop culture.
Yeah.
And don't chase us off the stoop. Yeah.
So thank you for that. What I am doing is, obviously, we never get everything right. No one's 100% perfect. We are all human, we fail. But what I like about every community, and especially Buka, is that they're very vocal. That auntie will come tell you now, you don't make that Midora, so. What I am also planning is to have like a community curated exhibition, where we actually invite the community to the collection, they choose an object and we curate that together. So that is what we're planning on doing.
Colleagues, I think we're going to have to end it there. We're 5 minutes over the 8 minutes that we were given extra. But it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful sharing our stories with you. It's been wonderful chatting with you. We look forward to further engagement. We spoke earlier about museums that require resources, and that some museums are better off than others. We have 12 museums. We are happy to engage with you about our future plans, etc., and how you can get involved with development of those and potentially partnering on them. We hope you have a fantastic evening in the South African Museum. We were asked by the management of RAM to put forward professionals, people that could speak professionally about reimagining, big names. And we said, actually, we got some big names for you, people on the ground that are actually doing the work. So we're very thankful. We're very thankful for the opportunity, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.